Hey everyone, Kyle Mike here from MLive.com, joined by Justin Rogers. We were actually on site today in East Lansing. Had a few meetings. Few meetings. But obviously some big news on the Lions front over the past few days. Calvin Johnson mulling retirement. It's a real thing. People we've talked to, and also the statement Calvin put out, it's pretty ominous. It's pretty clear. He's at least considering retirement. How seriously, we don't really know. Justin, what's your feeling right now on whether or not Calvin's back?
You know, when the statement was released, that's when I think I realized how serious it actually was. I mean, there's always speculation on these type of things, but for him to react proactively so quickly tells me that he's leaning that direction, and to kind of maybe soften the blow that it's coming. I don't know. I'm not in Calvin's head.
Right.
Calvin hasn't responded to any reporters' comments at this stage or questions, but I think this might be the end of the line for him.
I completely agree with you. People I've talked to have said, I talked to a former Lion who's real close with Calvin over the years, and I've read about this too, but this guy has talked to Calvin about retirement. Patrick Edwards, actually. Not your guy. No, but
Source.
Yeah. Calvin has talked about retirement for a couple of years now, just generally, and when he wants to do it, how he wants to go out, and it was clear to me that he wants to go out on top. He's been so good for so long. He's such a perfectionist, and he's a guy who holds himself to such a high standard. He's a guy who's great, and he's still in the building at 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m. before anyone else. I remember talking to a young receiver last year and saying, do you know when does Calvin get here? And he's like, I don't know. I try to beat him here, and every year I get here, or every day I get here a little bit earlier, and he still beats me here. And that's the kind of work ethic he puts in because he cares about his craft and how good he is. That's to say, could Calvin Johnson handle being average? I'm not sure if that's something he can handle, and I think that is playing into his decision. Of course, the losing, the health of his body, all those things are being considered as well. But yeah, I'm with you. When I heard the statement, I'm thinking, wow, okay, these things that I'm hearing, that other people are hearing, there's some merit to it, because you don't put out an ominous sounding statement like that. And the Lions putting out their own statement if it's not something that's truly being considered.
Yeah, listen, I think it's fair to say Johnson is still a top 10 wide receiver based on skill set, metrics, all that stuff. But he is in a very obvious decline, and the bigger receivers tend to take a much sharper downturn at the end of their career. Just look at some of Randy Moss's numbers at the end of his career; they're just awful. And Moss was equal, if not more talented than Calvin Johnson. There's something to be said about a guy that just doesn't want to see himself become a shell of himself. He doesn't want, and especially with such a big contract number, he has to answer those contract questions. He has to answer them from fans, he has to answer them from media, and he has to answer them from himself. Does he want to be the highest paid guy on the team where he's not producing as the best player on the team anymore? And that's a big mental hurdle, especially for a guy that is genuinely as humble as Calvin Johnson.
Yeah, his contract and his status with the team was hotly speculated on and debated throughout this year. Yeah. And that was with him as a top 10 receiver statistically, and still the number one receiver for the Lions, even if he did go through spells where he was less productive. But he was still the number one receiver, still a good player, and he's already facing these kind of questions. I do think it enters his mind, do I want to stick around for why I truly am in a production decline and facing more of these questions. Whether he actually walks away, I'm not sure. A lot of guys, and you can hear this elsewhere too, but it's very common for guys this time of year to contemplate their futures in the NFL. It's a brutal game. At this point, you're broken down. You just want to get on a beach somewhere with your family, whatever, and Calvin's going through that process. In a couple of weeks' time, if he gives himself a couple of weeks' time, it does sound like he'll give himself a little bit of time to ruminate on what's going on. He could change his mind. He could want to come back. It's not going to be for money, though. It's not going to be for individual accolades and those kinds of things, the records. He's done all these things. I think what's missing with Calvin is the winning. And I think the losing does take a toll. You saw it with Barry. It's a process you have to go through to put yourself on the field every Sunday when you're going through knee drainages and ankle sprains and playing through all this stuff. And then you go out there and you get smacked in the face every Sunday. And I think that does wear on a guy like Calvin. I think if the Lions they bring back Jim Caldwell and Jim Bob Cooter and keep kind of what they had going with the momentum offensively, and there's a decent chance they'll be good next year immediately, and there's not a total rebuild or a restructuring, I think that's the best chance to bring Calvin Johnson back. I think if there's a shakeup in the leadership, I would definitely err on the side of Calvin Johnson leaving.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. The last one I really wanted to make was that this is the time of year where guys doubt themselves the most. And rarely do you see a guy step away unless he's been thinking about it for a long time. Otherwise, they get that itch to come back as their body heals up. Johnson, in reality, has until mid-March to really make his decision from a team perspective. That's where free agency starts on March 15th. The draft is shortly after. The Lions would need to, formulate a replacement plan immediately for this season if he decides to step away. And so I think, he should give himself that time to let his body recuperate, let his mind recuperate before he, becomes too rash with this decision. I mean, we just saw Steve Smith retire in the middle of the season, then break his leg, and didn't want to go out that way. So Steve Smith's unretiring. He's coming back next year. Right. So, think about it, Calvin, and then make that decision in March when your mind and your body's right.
There's a lot of obvious parallels to what Calvin is going through or putting himself through to Barry Sanders for obvious reasons. But the big distinction I see between the two is the timing.
Huge.
Barry walked away on the eve of training camp. The team couldn't do anything about his loss. He was a great player, but I think that's what spurned a lot of fans was they didn't have a chance to say goodbye, and he didn't put the team in a position to accommodate for his loss. Calvin's way different. There's an entire offseason. He could ruminate on this for a month, and it still wouldn't affect the Lions at all because it still predate the draft and free agency. So at least the Lions do have that going for them. If they do lose Calvin, and for as much as we talk about Calvin being in decline, he's an important member to this team. He's the top player on offense. He does shape the way defenses play the Lions, and I think his loss will be felt in so many ways if the Lions do lose him.
Agreed.
For Justin Rogers, I'm Kyle Meinke. We're MLive. Keep it right here.